When I was 22, I took on a weekend job as a caretaker for a remote lake house. The owners, the Stevensons, were a wealthy couple who had decided to spend the winter abroad. They needed someone to look after their property. And since I was a local, they hired me to stay with their teenage daughter, Lily. It seemed like an easy gig. Just make sure the house didn't fall into disrepair while they were gone. The house itself was perched on the edge of a misty lake, surrounded by dark trees that always felt like they were closing in on the place. The air was thick with the scent of pine, and the only sound I ever heard was the gentle lapping of the water, broken only by the occasional gust of wind. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. On the first night, Lily and I were watching a horror movie in the living room, huddled on the old leather couch. We both loved the genre, and I figured it would be a nice way to pass the time. But just as the tension in the movie was reaching its peak, Lily paused the film. "Do you hear that?" she asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and something else I couldn't quite place. I froze, instinctively glancing around the room. It was quiet, the kind of eerie silence you only experience in the deep woods at night. But then I heard it, a soft knocking sound, almost like someone was tapping on the walls. It was faint at first, and then it grew louder, followed by a faint scratching like something or someone was trying to claw its way through the walls. I was sure it was just the wind, but there was something off about it, something that didn't sit right with me. I tried to dismiss it, but Lily looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. "It's happened before," she whispered, as though she was confessing something forbidden. "I've heard it since I was little, the scratching, but Mom and Dad always said it was just animals outside." She was shaking now, her hands curled into fists in her lap. "It feels like someone's inside, like we're not alone." I didn't know what to say. It seemed ridiculous, but in the pit of my stomach, I could feel something stirring, a sensation I couldn't shake. We tried to go back to the movie, but the noise didn't stop. It grew louder, more insistent, until the scratching seemed to crawl under my skin. I remember looking over at Lily, but she was already wide awake, her face pale and tight with fear. I tried to convince her that it was nothing, that it was just a house settling or some animal in the walls, but I couldn't bring myself to believe it. The longer I sat there, the more I started to doubt myself. Later, as the night stretched on, the noises escalated. I was lying in bed, trying to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, the tapping would start again, this time from the closet. It was faint at first, like fingernails gently tapping against wood, but it quickly became sharper, more deliberate, almost like someone was knocking on the door from the inside. I kept telling myself it was just the wind, but it didn't feel like the wind. It didn't feel like anything natural. Lily was already sitting up in bed when I opened my eyes. She was trembling, staring wide-eyed at the closet door. "I can't take this anymore," she whispered. "It's getting worse." Her voice was a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might make whatever was feel real. I crept toward the door, my heart thundering in my chest. The knocking had stopped, but I could still hear the faint scratching sound coming from inside. It was like something was trapped in there, begging to get out. My fingers brushed against the handle, and just as I was about to open the door, I felt it, a cold breeze, icy and unnatural, brushing against the back of my neck. I whipped around, my pulse racing, but there was nothing there, nothing but the empty, still room. That was when the door creaked, open on its own. I didn't know if it was the wind or something else, but the sound of it was enough to send a jolt of terror through me. I looked inside, expecting to find nothing but old coats and shoes, but that's not what I saw. At the back of the closet, tucked away in a dusty corner, was an old box. It looked ancient, covered in a thick layer of dust, and there was something strange about it. A strange engraving, something I couldn't quite make out, was carved into the wood. Without thinking, I reached for it, my hands trembling as I pried the lid open. Inside, I found an old photograph, yellow with age. It was a picture of Lily's parents, smiling and happy at the lake, their arms wrapped around each other. But in the background of the photo, there was something or someone standing in the shadows. It was a figure I didn't recognize. A man, maybe, or something else entirely. The figure was dark, indistinct, almost like a shadow that didn't belong. I didn't know what to think. I grabbed the photo and immediately went to call Lily's mom. When she answered, her voice was strained, like she was holding something back. "Don't touch anything in that house," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I told you it's haunted. We never go near the lake, and we never, ever go near that closet." Her words were like a punch to the gut. I didn't know what to say. She sounded so scared, so desperate. "What do you mean? What happened in that closet?" There was a long pause before she spoke again. "Lily's father," she said, her voice trembling. "He died at the lake 5 years ago. He was obsessed with that closet. He spent days in there, locked inside, after we moved into the house. And then one night, he vanished. We never saw him again. And after that, the house was different. It was never the same." The words hung in the air like a curse. I felt sick to my stomach. I didn't know what to do. I tried calling Lily, but there was no answer. Panic started to creep in as I searched the house for her. It was almost like she had disappeared. But then, when I looked out the window, I saw her. She was standing at the edge of the lake, staring at the water, her back turned to me. I ran outside, shouting her name, but she didn't seem to hear me. The mist had rolled in thick, and the moon was barely visible through the haze. As I approached, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was someone standing beside Lily, a shadowy figure, tall and indistinct, its form flickering in and out of existence like smoke. I screamed, running toward them, but the figure vanished before I could reach her. When I finally reached Lily, she was staring blankly at the water, her eyes wide and unblinking. She had no memory of what had just happened. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice shaking with fear. "What happened?" She looked at me, confused, as if I had just woken her from a dream. "I don't know," she said softly. "I was just looking at the water." But that night, the messages didn't stop. Later, I received a text from Lily's phone. It said only, "Help me, he's back." I didn't know what to make of it. I tried calling her, but there was no answer. The terror that had been building for days was now consuming me. I couldn't stay in that house. I had to leave. I never returned to that lake house. The air inside the house on Oak Street felt heavier than I had expected. I remember stepping inside, the floors creaking under my weight as if the house itself was sighing in relief. The walls, lined with old family portraits, seemed to watch me with their dusty eyes, their faces frozen in time. I'd never been one to believe in ghost stories, but something about this house made my skin crawl. When I arrived, the parents of Owen and Sarah were friendly, but clearly in a hurry. The father gave me a quick rundown of their kids' routines, but I barely paid attention. I was just eager for the cash. The pay for this babysitting job was decent, and the idea of spending a quiet evening in a huge, eerie house was, well, kind of thrilling in its own way. They handed me a note with a list of instructions, and then, after a quick goodbye, they were gone, leaving me alone with the kids. Owen was a quiet boy, with deep blue eyes that seemed older than his 8 years. Sarah was a bundle of energy, her curls bouncing as she skipped around the living room. After I settled them into their beds, Sarah snuggled in with her stuffed bunny, and Owen reluctantly crawling under the covers after a quick glance at the attic door. I was left to myself. The house felt cold as the night dragged on, though it wasn't much colder than the crisp autumn air outside. I checked the time, just after 8. Still plenty of evening to go. I could hear the wind howling through the trees outside, making the house groan in response. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary, but something felt off. Maybe it was just the isolation. I was used to being around other people, but this house, it felt like it had a presence. As I started to settle in, preparing for a long night of TV and scrolling through my phone, I thought back to the note. Owen had mentioned hearing whispers from the attic. I remembered reading that, thinking it was probably just his imagination, something to make the house seem more ominous. It was probably just a story his parents had put in his head to keep him in line. I was so wrong. I hadn't been sitting for long when I first heard it. A soft sound, barely perceptible at first. I paused, listening intently. Was that whispering? I shook my head. It must have been the wind rattling the old windows. It was a strange house, after all. It was probably the house settling, the wood groaning under its own weight. But then I heard it again, louder this time. The whispers seemed to come from above. The attic. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself it was just the wind, but something gnawed at the pit of my stomach. The same eerie feeling I had when I first stepped through a front door started to creep back into my mind. My heart thudded louder in my chest as I tried to focus on anything else. Then, a sudden, sharp sound. A cry. It came from Owen's room. I froze, my heart racing. What could it be? He had been asleep? Or so I thought. I rushed down the hallway, my breath quickening, and opened the door to find Owen sitting up in bed, eyes wide, his stuffed bear clutched tightly in his arms. "I hear them again, Emily," he whispered, voice trembling. The voices from the attic. His words sent a shiver down my spine. I knelt beside him, trying to comfort him, but my own unease was growing. "It's just the wind," I said, forcing a smile. "You're fine, Owen." But he shook his head, his eyes darting nervously toward the ceiling. "No, Emily, they're real. They're up there." My attempts to soothe him fell hollow, and I found myself glancing at the attic door. I hadn't thought much of Owen's earlier warnings, but now I was starting to feel the weight of them. But it was probably nothing, just his imagination running wild in the dark, a child's fear of the unknown. I tucked Owen back into bed and gave him a reassuring pat on the head, though it didn't calm my own racing thoughts. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I had no reason to be scared. The house was old, yes, but there were logical explanations for everything. I was just about to head back to the living room when my phone buzzed on the table. I picked it up, thinking it was just a message from a friend, or maybe a spam text. But when I saw the notification, my stomach dropped. The message was from an unknown number, and the words were chilling. "They're in the attic. They want you to come up. You know what you did." I stared at the text, my fingers trembling as I tried to make sense of it. It didn't make any sense. Who would send something like this? And how did they know about the attic? I glanced nervously toward the door, then down at my phone again. It was just a prank, right? Some sick joke. But even as I tried to convince myself, I felt an overwhelming urge to check it out. I stood up, my legs heavy with hesitation. The house seemed to grow colder the closer I got to the attic door. The message still burned in my mind. "They want you to come up. You know what you did." What did it mean? I reached for the door, my hand brushing against the old brass handle. It was cold to the touch. The attic was locked, as the parents had mentioned in their note, but the eerie sensation gnawed at me. Something was wrong. I tried the handle again, but it was firmly shut. I took a step back, exhaling sharply. It was nothing. I was just letting my imagination get the best of me. Then, the scream shattered my thoughts. I turned sharply, my heart nearly leaping out of my chest. It was Sarah, her tiny form now bolting upright in her bed, eyes wide and terrified, her scream echoing through the house. I rushed to her room, my feet stumbling over the floorboards as I tried to get to her. But as I reached the doorway, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps. Heavy, uneven footsteps above, in the attic. I froze, my blood turned to ice. There was no one else here. The house was empty. My breath hitched as I turned back to the attic door. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen counter and shone it on the door. Then, against every instinct screaming at me to run, I twisted the handle. It clicked open, the door creaking on its hinges as it swung inward. The attic was empty. The air was thick with dust, the floor covered in old boxes and forgotten memories. But then, my eyes landed on the rocking chair. It sat in the corner, still untouched, until it began to move. Slowly, at first, just a gentle sway. But then it picked up speed, rocking back and forth, faster and faster, as if something or someone was pushing it. My breath caught in my throat. I heard the buzz of my phone again. The same unknown number. We never left. I slammed the attic door shut and backed away, my mind spinning, my heart raced in my chest, and all I wanted was to get out of that house, to escape whatever was haunting it. But just as I turned to run, I heard something else. A voice, faint but unmistakable, whispering from the dark corners of the house. "You shouldn't have come." The words echoed in my mind as I grabbed my phone and called the parents. There was no answer. They'd already left the concert. When they returned, they told me I had failed at my job. I was too scared, they said, too weak. And when I tried to explain what had happened, they dismissed me. It wasn't until later that I learned the truth. The house had once belonged to a family that had disappeared without a trace decades ago. And though I had tried to leave it behind, the messages kept coming. They never stopped. We never left. Always the same. And though I tried to trace the number, it was never found. Some say the spirits of the family still linger in that house, restless and searching for something. Some say they want to reach out, to warn anyone who dares step foot inside their domain. But I know now, I was never supposed to be there. And the house on Oak Street is never truly empty.